just going to open up today and say that I feel really bad for Cam Newton. After dedicating 9 years to the Carolina Panthers, playing some of those years without a star wide receiver, he had an aging Steve Smith towards the beginning of his career, playing a lot of those years without a star running back, Cam Newton carried the Panthers to a lot of wins. After 9 years of dedication to that franchise, they end up screwing him over in the end. When Matt Rule had his introductory press conference a couple of months ago, I told you guys that Cam Newton's days in Carolina were all but over. Even though Matt Rule was saying that he wanted to hang on to Cam, he was excited to work with him, we all knew that wasn't going to be the case. You're starting a new era in Carolina, and it's hard to do that with the old franchise quarterback from the previous era. But the Carolina Panthers owed Cam Newton more than what they gave him in his exit. Instead of releasing him during the beginning of free agency, they held on to him, hoping for a trade, hoping to get something in return for him. But the problem with that is other teams knew that they could get him cheaper once he was released. They wouldn't have to give up anything. So the Panthers didn't receive any offers from other teams. A week into free agency, Carolina decides they're going to cut bait and release Cam Newton. Something that they had decided back in January, if not before that. I think it was a surprise to Cam Newton, judging by the reaction of his release, but it wasn't a surprise to anybody else, I don't think. For everything that Cam has done for Carolina, the Panthers as an organization owed him better than that. They knew they didn't want him on the roster next season. They should have released him at the beginning of free agency, gave him the opportunity to find a starting position elsewhere. Instead, they wait a full week. Teams looking for starting quarterbacks have already filled their positions, and Cam Newton is stuck where he is right now, in the unemployment line. I don't agree with Cam that the Panthers, quote, gave up on him. I don't agree with that at all. They're just moving in a different direction. There are questions regarding his health. I don't think Cam Newton can be the Cam Newton of 5 years ago anymore. I don't think that's going to happen. If he wants to play another 5 or 6 years in the NFL, or even more than that, he can't be the running quarterback he used to be. He's going to have to develop into a pocket passer. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't run the football at all. The threat of the run is what makes him so dangerous. But he's got to have a pass-first mentality instead of a run-first mentality going forward. Lucky for Cam Newton, there are some teams that are still in need of a starting quarterback. I think one of the reasons that he hasn't gotten an offer yet is because of this coronavirus outbreak. Obviously, he can't go work out for potential teams, ease some of the concerns that are surrounding his health by these other teams seeing him up close and personal in a physical workout. I think another reason he hasn't received any offers has to do with the draft. When a team signs free agents or they lose players in free agency, it affects their draft slots in the later rounds. There's a formula that the league uses. It's kind of confusing, to be honest with you. They equate the dollar value of the contract, and that dollar value equals a certain pick, say in the third or fourth round of the draft. So the higher the dollar value, the lower the pick. The lower the dollar value, the higher the pick. So they take the amount of players that a team has gained in free agency, a team has lost in free agency, and they put some formula in, and that's how they come up with these compensatory picks in the draft. It's really confusing. Take the New York Giants, for example. They lost Landon Collins last year in free agency. He ends up signing with Washington for $14 million, which equaled a third-round level pick in the draft. The Giants added a couple of players, but the combined contracts of those players didn't equal the value of Landon Collins' deal in Washington. Because of that, the Giants received a compensatory pick at number 99 in the third round. I tell you all that because if a team signs Cam Newton right now, It has a direct effect on their 2021 draft. If they wait until the draft is over, it won't compromise their late round draft selection next year. Basically, it's beneficial for teams interested in Cam Newton or Jameis Winston or your bigger name free agents that aren't garnering much attention right now to wait until the draft is over to sign them. Wherever Cam Newton ends up next season, I don't think he's going to get a deal until after the draft takes place. There's really only a handful of teams, like I said, left that are in need of a starting quarterback. The Denver Broncos, they have a question mark at the quarterback position. Drew Lock played well towards the end of last season when he was given an opportunity, but he wasn't good enough to proclaim him a franchise quarterback at this point. He also didn't play in enough games to crown him the franchise quarterback in Denver. Now, I think he'll be the Broncos starter in week 1, but if he struggles, it would be nice to have a guy like Cam Newton waiting on the sidelines. Denver released Joe Flacco this offseason, went out and signed Jeff Driscoll for the backup role, but he was downright terrible last year in Detroit. He was god-awful. The Broncos have a playoff caliber roster right now. Top 10 defense. They got Melvin Gordon in the backfield. They just need a quarterback to lead the way. Is Drew Lock that guy? No one knows. I mean, John Elway's really high on him. The Broncos closed out the season 4-1 with Drew Lock starting. He was decent, but he wasn't what I'd call great. He had under 200 yards passing in 3 of the 4 wins. The only good team he beat over that stretch was Houston. The other wins were against the Chargers, the Lions, and the Raiders. When he went up against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, he was absolutely dreadful. But for a rookie quarterback, he was pretty good in the 5 games he started. John Elway needs the Denver Broncos back in the playoffs ASAP. The defense is only going to be good for so long. They're only going to be a top 10 defense for so long. Eventually, they will age. We've seen elite defenses in the NFL drop drastically in just 1 season. If Drew Lock struggles, Cam Newton would be a nice insurance policy for John Elway to have in Denver. There are only 2 teams, in my opinion, where Cam Newton could go and start day 1. One of those teams is the Jacksonville Jaguars. With them trading Nick Foles, their lone option right now for a starting quarterback is Gardner Minshew. With Doug Marrone, I think, coaching for his job next season, there's going to be a lot of tears shed in the Marrone household if Gardner fucking Minshew is his only option at quarterback. I never understood the Minshew mania that broke out at the beginning of last season. Gardner Minshew was 2-4 over the first 6 weeks. And people were acting like he was the second coming of Steve Young. Gardner Minshew's not terrible, but if I'm Doug Marrone, he isn't the guy I want to stake my coaching future on. If Cam Newton decided to head to Jacksonville, he wouldn't have to carry the offense like he had to do at times in Carolina. They've got a Pro Bowl receiver in DJ Chark. D.D. Westbrook is a nice second option. Oh yeah, they've got a beast in the backfield named Leonard Fournette. Maybe you heard of him. Plus, Jacksonville's got the cap space to offer Cam a good deal. The Jags have over $20 million in cap space, so he could sign on $14, $15 million on a short-term deal, and if he performs, get a big money extension after next season. The problem, though, with Cam Newton going to Jacksonville is going to be the defense. I mentioned earlier that defenses in the NFL can go from elite to bottom feeders quickly. Back in 2017, the Jacksonville Jaguars were the top defense in the league. But the days of Saxonville are long gone. Elite defenses tend to regress quicker when they trade away their best players. Jalen Ramsey, gone. Calais Campbell, gone. So the pressure would be on Cam Newton to win games. He'd had to overcome a bad defense, deal with the pressure of having a coach that is probably going to enter next season on the hot seat. I think Jacksonville, like I've said before on this podcast, I think Jacksonville would be a better spot for Jameis Winston. If I'm Cam Newton, if I'm his agent, the most ideal place would be the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are a ready-made playoff team right now. They were good defensively last season, but they were constantly put in bad positions because of Phillip Rivers and his million turnovers. It's a situation that's similar to what the Tampa defense found themselves in last season, dealing with Jameis Winston and his turnovers. If you go back and look, in the games Phillip Rivers played well, didn't turn the ball over or minimize the turnovers, the Chargers won those games. I know Anthony Lynn likes Tyrod Taylor, but I don't think he's the answer. He's not a guy that's going to lead a team into the playoffs. And Anthony Lynn has got to have a good season in 2020, or he's going to be looking for another job. At minimum, be on the hot seat. Cam Newton would boost this team on the football field, but the Chargers desperately need him for what he could do for this team off the field. This team is in desperate need of star power. The Chargers play 16 road games every season because their home field is usually full of the road team's fans. When Aaron Rodgers and the Packers played in LA last season, the stadium was full of cheeseheads. It was a mistake moving this team to Los Angeles in the first place. LA does not need two NFL teams, but the Chargers are in LA, and they desperately need a star quarterback to revive this franchise. There is no doubt of Cam Newton's star power. He's got over 4 million Instagram followers. His personality would be a perfect fit in Los Angeles. If he went to LA, he would probably be more beneficial off the field for the Chargers than he would be on the field. And if they started winning, if they made the playoffs with Cam Newton at quarterback, they might surpass the Rams as the biggest NFL team in Los Angeles. Cam Newton is a much bigger star than Jared Goff. I know the Chargers had the 6th pick in the draft, and all signs point to them drafting a quarterback. But like I said a second ago, Anthony Lynn has got to win this year. There is too much talent on this roster. They've got 2 young receivers in their prime. Cam Newton would have more talent with this team than he ever had in Carolina. Even if they draft a quarterback, I think the Chargers would still sign Cam Newton to a short-term deal. And he would beat out the rookie and Tyrod Taylor for the starting spot. All right, moving on. It's been made official. The NFL has expanded its playoff pool from 12 to 14 teams. Now, why did this happen? Was the old 12-team playoff system, which has been in place since 1990, was that a broken system? No. The NFL playoffs are ratings gold. The reason the NFL expanded the playoffs comes down to one thing. And if you think about it hard enough, it's simple to figure out. Money. In the wild card round alone last year, the NFL averaged almost 31 million viewers a game. That is a huge number. And that's just the opening round. The NBA and Major League Baseball would kill for that type of number in the NBA Finals or the World Series. The NFL is getting that kind of viewership in the first round of the playoffs. Broadcast networks are paying premiums right now for sports programming. I think this decision by the NFL was made to appease the networks more than it was to meet some type of fan demand for more teams in the playoffs. I don't necessarily mind this playoff expansion, but I also don't think it's a good thing either. The NFL playoff system was phenomenal with the 12 teams. As the old saying goes, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The big thing with this expanded playoff field, it completely devalues the number 2 seed. Traditionally, the number 1 and the number 2 seed in each conference get a first round bye, which is huge. Every Super Bowl team the past 7 years has received a bye in the first round. Teams like the Baltimore Ravens or the New York Giants playing in all 3 rounds of the playoffs and making the Super Bowl are the exception to the rule. The first round bye is huge. It is a big advantage. My biggest concern with this new playoff system, though, and the addition of a 17th game to the regular season, is how is this going to affect the regular season? The NFL regular season is the best thing in sports. Every game matters. When you take away the first round bye from the 2 seed, that can have a major impact on the end of the regular season. Take last year, for example. The Saints won the NFC South on Thanksgiving night. They ended up losing a couple of weeks later to the 49ers. San Francisco at that point had pretty much locked up the 1 seed. So it takes away the incentive the last 2 or 3 weeks of the year for teams like New Orleans, teams like Green Bay. Remember that Monday Night Football game between the Packers and Vikings? Happened in Week 16? That game is pretty much meaningless now in the new playoff system because the number 2 seed doesn't secure a first round bye. So those last 2 or 3 weeks of the year for teams like the Saints and the Packers, they're just playing for seeding. So if you win your division by Week 15 and have no shot at the number 1 seed, the last 2 or 3 weeks of the regular season mean nothing. Playoff seeding is not as important in the NFL as it is in the NBA. A number 3 seed and a number 6 seed in the NFL, there isn't much difference between those 2 teams. Hell, there isn't much difference between the best team in the NFL and the worst team in the NFL. Take a team like the Cleveland Browns last year. We can all agree the Browns were not a very good football team. Poorly coached, offense was never in rhythm. The Browns hosted Buffalo in Week 10. Going into that game, Cleveland was 2-6. The Bills were 6-2. Buffalo was a playoff team. They were clearly better than the Browns, on paper anyway. In that game, Buffalo was a 3-point dog. In the NBA, it's completely different. There is a huge gap between the number 1 seed in the playoffs and the number 8 seed. Same with the 2 and the 7. You can even make the case for the 3 and the 6. It was considered a huge upset back in 2018 when the Pelicans, who were the 6th seed, swept Portland. For the most part, the first round of the NBA playoffs is largely predictable. That's not the case in the NFL. I've said it before on this podcast. I'll say it again. One of the main reasons the NFL is so popular is because it's scarce. Scarcity creates value. We only have 4 months of football in the regular season, compared to 6 months for the NBA and for Major League Baseball. The NFL season flies by. Then we spend the next 6 or 7 months waiting for it to come back, speculating the entire time about which teams improved during free agency and the draft. Will the expanded playoff field water down the playoffs? Will it allow bad teams into the postseason? Yes and no. There have been teams in the past that were 10-6 that didn't make the playoffs. Obviously, those teams would make the postseason better with the new expansion. But there have also been some mediocre teams on the cusp of the playoffs that have been eliminated in the past that will qualify under the new system. Take the Pittsburgh Steelers last year, for example. The Steelers were 8-8. They would have been the number 7 seed under this new system. Now, there's no fucking way the Steelers were a playoff team last year. You think that Mason Rudolph was going to lead the Steelers into Kansas City and beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs? Hell no. It would have been a blowout. Pittsburgh was an eyesore to watch offensively last year. Same with the Rams. LA finished last year 9-7. Now, you can make an argument that with the talent that they had on that roster, along with their 9-7 record, that the Rams would be a worthy playoff team. But I don't think so. The Rams were 2-4 against playoff teams last year. And one of those wins came against the Saints when Drew Brees was knocked out of the game early in the first half. So really, they were 1-4 if you don't count that game. They were blown out by Tampa and Dallas. Lost 2 of their last 3 games. Mason Rudolph had one of his best games of the season against the Rams when Pittsburgh beat them. Does that sound like a playoff team to you? Traditionally in the NFL, you got to be a 10-win team to make the playoffs. This new playoff system makes it significantly easier to be 9-7 or 8-8 and make the tournament. One of the biggest complaints that a lot of people have about the NBA postseason is that half the league makes it in. Well, now it's the same in the NFL. 14 of the 30 teams will be in the playoffs. Will it dilute the quality? Some years it probably will. Some it won't. I think the biggest impact is going to be removing the bye from the number 2 seed. We're going to see how that impacts the end of the regular season. Like I said, if you clinch your division with 1, 2, 3 weeks to go in the regular season and have no shot at the number 1 seed, there really isn't much of a point to play your starters late in the year. All right, let's get to the Saints. Drew Brees signed a 2-year contract with New Orleans a week or so ago. He's been playing year to year since 2017. This contract's no different, but when he signed the 2-year contract, I told you guys that I thought that 2020 would be the final season for Drew Brees. There were a couple of reasons that I said that. His production has fallen off late in the season and in the playoffs the past 3 years. His inability to throw the deep ball has hurt the Saints offensively at times. Defenses play up closer. They don't have to worry about the threat of getting beat deep. The few times a season that Drew Brees does throw a deep ball, normally it is severely underthrown. Another reason I think this is the final year for Brees is I believe that the Saints' Super Bowl window is closing. The defense is getting older. Alvin Kamara is coming into the age where running backs begin to experience a decline in production. Several of the key players the Saints have drafted over the last 3-4 years are coming up for contract extensions within the next year. We just saw Von Bell, a guy drafted by the Saints in 2016, leave in free agency because the Saints wouldn't pay him. They didn't have the money. Now he's playing for the hapless fucking Bungles. I feel bad for the guy. Really like Von Bell in the Saints secondary. The main reason, though, that I think this is going to be Drew Brees' last year is because Sean Payton has what he thinks is his future franchise quarterback waiting on the sidelines to take over. Sean Payton loves Taysom Hill. Before Taysom Hill was a big name, I remember watching a Saints game on Fox. This was back in 2018. Joe Buck and Troy Aikman were calling the game. I think the Saints were playing the Eagles. Troy Aikman said that he had talked to Sean Payton that week and that Payton believed that Taysom Hill was going to be the next Steve Young. So his love for Taysom Hill is not something new. Sean Payton has incorporated him into the offense more and more over the past couple of years. There are offensive packages specific to Taysom Hill. He's been grooming him for 2 years to replace Drew Brees. The other day, Sean Payton was on ESPN, and he said that Drew Brees was returning in 2020 for his final season. Now, some people are calling this accidental. Sean Payton accidentally said 2020 would be Drew Brees' final season. This wasn't accidental. This was not a Freudian slip. He didn't stammer or stutter when he was asked. He was deliberate in what he said. Whether or not Drew Brees thinks this will be his final season, I don't know. He hasn't said anything about it, and probably won't until next January. Sean Payton and Drew Brees are good friends. They have the best bond of any head coach quarterback combination in the NFL. As hard as it will be to end a 15, 16-year era, I think Sean Payton wants 2020 to be Drew Brees' final season. He knows he's not the same quarterback that he used to be. Now, even still, Drew Brees at 41 years old is still a top 5 quarterback in this league. There's a reason that Drew Brees needs to step away in 2020, and his name is Taysom Hill. Sean Payton is friends with Bill Belichick. Don't think for a second that Bill Belichick hasn't warned him about what happened with him in New England. Having to trade his future franchise quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, because Tom Brady wasn't close to retirement at that point. Sean Payton is in a similar situation right now with Drew Brees and Taysom Hill. He believes Taysom Hill is the quarterback of the Saints for the next 6, 7, 8 years. But Taysom Hill has been very vocal about the fact that he wants to be a starting quarterback. And if it's not going to happen in New Orleans soon, he will go elsewhere. I know Drew Brees has stated that he wants to play until he's 45. But let's be honest. It's not going to happen. I wish it were the case because every year for the past 15 or 16 years with Drew Brees under center, I knew the Saints were a playoff caliber team. But there's just no way that he's playing until he's 45 years old. Drew Brees is a legend in New Orleans. His number will be retired. There will be a statue of him outside of the Superdome. He's the number one Saint of all time, and there's no doubt about it. There will never be another Drew Brees in New Orleans. But at some point, he's got to come to the realization that it's over. The franchise, the team, they've got to move on. He can't allow Taysom Hill to walk away because he wants to play one more season. Because that's what's going to happen. If Drew Brees wants to play in 2021 and the Saints allow it, which they will, because you can't force a legend like that out, then Taysom Hill will be gone. Now, whether or not Taysom Hill will be a great quarterback in this league, I don't know. The few glimpses that we've seen of him under center, he's been good. But he's only thrown 15 passes his entire career. There's a big difference in coming in 2 or 3 plays a game as a quarterback and being on the field every down, being the face and the leader of the franchise. Now, if the Saints win the Super Bowl next season, this will be an easy decision for everyone involved. I think Drew Brees would walk away willingly, retire on top, just like Peyton Manning did a few years ago. But what happens if the Saints are only one play away again? What happens if the Saints are in the NFC Championship game and lose in the final seconds? You think Drew Brees is going to go out like that? I don't. He's going to want to come back for one more year, just like what's happened the last 2 years. It's a vicious cycle. I don't think the ending of the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era will be ugly like what we just saw in New England. There was a lot of bad blood in New England, a lot of resentment between Belichick and Brady that was building up over the years. And that's not the case in New Orleans. But if the Saints don't win a Super Bowl next year and they come close like they have the past couple of years, then Sean Payton's going to have a decision to make about what he wants to do with Taysom Hill and Drew Brees. All right, I'm going to close out today with Frank Reich and the Colts. If you've been listening to this podcast since I started right before last football season, then you know that Frank Reich in Indianapolis is one of my favorite young coaches in the NFL. And when I say young, I'm not talking about his age. I mean young in coaching terms. He's only been a head coach since 2018. I think he's a great offensive mind. He was the offensive coordinator with the Eagles back in 2017 when they won the Super Bowl. When Carson Wentz went down that season, everyone thought it was over. Frank Reich was a big reason the Eagles' play didn't drop off. He turned Nick Foles into a household name for a moment. Before the season ended last year, when I started talking about Tom Brady leaving New England, I thought one of the best places he could go was Indianapolis. The Colts have a great roster. People forget that this team was 5-2 before Jacoby Brissett and half the damn roster went down to injury. But Frank Reich apparently didn't feel the same way about Tom Brady. He came out on Tuesday and said he thought Phillip Rivers was a better fit for the Colts than Tom Brady was. He said he's watched Rivers' tape the past 2 years and he hasn't seen any physical drop-off. What? I guess Frank Reich is only looking at statistics, which can be very misleading. If you just look at Phillip Rivers' stats, see that he's thrown for over 4,000 yards 7 straight years, you'd think he was a top 5, top 10 quarterback. But that is not the case, far from it. Phillip Rivers is a Hall of Fame quarterback. There's no doubt about it. But for most of the past 5 years, he has been absolutely god-awful. Led the league in interceptions twice. He would have had that honor last year had Jameis Winston and Baker Mayfield not taken it away from him. From 2006 to 2014, Phillip Rivers was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He was 88-56, 5 playoff appearances. Made it to the AFC Championship game back in 2007. Lost to the guy that Frank Reich said wasn't as good of a fit in Indianapolis. Terrific Tom Brady. But from 2015 to 2019, Rivers has been a bottom feeder. He's 35-45, 1 playoff appearance. Outside of that one great season in 2018, he has absolutely sucked. After 4 straight playoff appearances from 06 to 09, Phillip Rivers has been to the playoffs just twice the last 10 years. Frank Reich saying Phillip Rivers is a better fit than Tom Brady in Indianapolis is insanity. The crazy thing is, he had a front row seat to the beginning of the decline of Phillip Rivers' career. He was the quarterback coach, then the offensive coordinator in San Diego from 2013 to 2015. You know how many times that Tom Brady has went 4-12 or 5-11? 0. Since Drew Brees has been with Sean Payton in New Orleans, you know how many times that he's went 4-12 or 5-11? 0. Phillip Rivers has done that 3 times in the past 5 years. Maybe Frank Reich is watching different tape than everyone else. Maybe he sees something that I don't see. Because I don't know which football world that Phillip Rivers is a better fit than Tom Brady anywhere. Long term, I think this is going to be a mistake for the Colts. I thought Jacoby Brissett was playing well last season before the entire fucking roster was injured. Frank Reich said that Jacoby Brissett was pissed off when Indy went out and signed Phillip Rivers. Well, no shit. Obviously, who wouldn't be? I'm sure Jacoby Brissett thinks he's better at this point than Phillip Rivers is. He's lost his job to a guy that he thinks he's better than. And right now, he is. All right, that's all for today, guys. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for me. Click that notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Leave a comment in the section below. Let me know what you think about the podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. I will try to get back on here this weekend. Depends on, how much news there is going on. I know I haven't made it on the past couple of weekends, but to be honest with you, there just hasn't really been much to talk about. So I'll try to get back on here this weekend. If I don't, have a good weekend, and I will see you next Tuesday, definitely.